When the socialite grabbed his maid's wrist and sneered, "Is that garbage on your finger?" the copper ring slipped free and hit the marble floor with a sound that shattered everything. Alexander Hart, one of America's richest men, dropped to his knees in front of 200 people. He picked up that worthless piece of twisted wire and sea glass with trembling hands and said words that ended his carefully built reputation. "You cannot afford to touch this ring with every dollar you'll ever have." Because 23 years ago, he'd made that ring for a girl in a group home. A girl who'd save him from drowning in a frozen lake. A girl he'd promised to marry when he escaped poverty. She'd kept the ring. She'd kept the promise. And she'd been cleaning his house for 3 weeks without saying a word. Before we go any further, if you appreciate stories about kindness, love, and promises that stand the test of time, would you do me a small favor? Just tap that like button. It helps more people find these stories. And if you're new here, consider subscribing. We share stories like this every week. Stories that remind us what truly matters in life. Your support means the world. Now, back to Alexander and the ring that changed everything. The question that haunted him from the moment he saw that copper wire on her finger wasn't whether she remembered him. She clearly did. The question was why she chose silence. Why she moved through his mansion like a ghost, caring for him in ways no one had in decades, leaving small signs that she knew exactly who he was, but never, not once, speaking his name. Was it dignity? Was it pain? Or was there something darker underneath? Something he wasn't ready to face? But why the silence? To understand why Alexander Hart was on his knees at that gala, you need to know what happened 3 weeks earlier, the night he fired 8 people in 6 minutes over candles. Alexander Hart didn't raise his voice when he destroyed careers. He never had to. On that November evening, he walked to the front door of his cliff-top mansion after 16 hours of negotiations that would make or break a $2 billion acquisition. He was exhausted, his head pounded. All he wanted was silence and the familiar scent of home. Instead, he smelled lavender, sweet, cloying, suffocating lavender where there should have been sandalwood. The head housekeeper stepped forward with a practiced smile. "Mr. Hart, I thought the house could use something warmer. Lavender is known to reduce stress." "And who asked you to think?" Her smile faltered. "I beg your pardon?" "The sandalwood candles. Were they? We disposed of them. They were nearly empty, and I thought, you're fired. All of you. 8 people. 8 careers. Gone." The story spread through Seattle's elite circles by morning. The media had a field day. Tech billionaire's reign of terror continues. Forbes called him brilliant but unstable. His publicists called him a PR nightmare. His competitors called him unhinged. But those candles weren't about preference. They were about a memory he'd spent 23 years trying to bury. A memory of a freezing group home in Detroit where sandalwood incense was the only thing that masked the smell of institutional poverty. Where a 10-year-old girl with hopeful eyes used to sit beside him during prayer time, both of them pretending to believe in something better. That night, alone in his mansion, Alexander lit one of the new lavender candles and immediately extinguished it. Then he sat in the dark and remembered what it felt like to be 12 years old and make promises he couldn't keep. 300 miles away in Portland, Elena Martinez was having a different conversation about the impossible Alexander Hart. She slid a folder across her desk to a woman who sat with perfect posture, hands folded in her lap, dark hair pulled back in a simple bun. Everything about her was designed not to be noticed. "This is the 8th agency he's burned through in 18 months, Elena said. "The man is a walking disaster." Sarah Mitchell didn't reach for the folder. What did the others do wrong? They existed. Elena leaned back. Alexander Hart doesn't want a housekeeper. He wants a ghost. Someone who cleans his house, maintains a schedule, anticipates his needs. All without ever being seen, heard, or acknowledged. Then why does he keep firing people? Because they keep trying to be helpful, to be noticed, to be human. Elena tapped the folder. "But you're different, Sarah. In 5 years, I've never had a single complaint about you. Not one. Most clients don't even remember your name, which in this business is the highest compliment." Sarah's lips curved slightly. I like being invisible. Good, because that's exactly what this job requires. Elena pushed the folder closer. Don't let him see you. Don't let him hear you. Don't leave any trace you were ever there. Can you do that? Sarah opened the folder. Her eyes scanned the details. Client preferences, schedules, requirements. Then she saw it. Sandalwood candles. Always sandalwood. Her hand trembled, just slightly. How much does it pay? She asked quietly. Elena named a figure that would have made most people's eyes widen. Sarah's didn't, because Elena didn't know that Sarah had been searching for this job for 5 years. That getting into Alexander Hart's home wasn't random. It was fate finally catching up. I'll do it, Sarah said. Sarah Mitchell arrived at the Clifftop Mansion at 5:30 in the morning, when November fog still clung to Pacific, and the house looked like something rising from a dream or a memory. She removed her shoes at the door, replacing them with thick wool socks that silenced her footsteps on the hardwood floors. The previous staff had left in chaos. Dishes piled in the sink, dust gathering on surfaces. She got to work. She found the storage room first, pushed into a corner, as if someone had tried to make them disappear, sat a half-empty box of sandalwood candles. She placed them exactly where the lavender ones had been, matching the wax levels to the rings they'd left on the surfaces. She noticed the lights were too harsh. Clinical white that probably triggered migraines. She adjusted the smart home system room by room, shifting to warm amber, reducing intensity by 20%. In the kitchen, she placed a glass of water, infused with cucumber and lemon beside the coffee maker. Not to replace his coffee, just to offer something gentler. By the time she finished, the sun was setting. She had worked 11 hours. She had not eaten. She had not sat down. She had not made a single sound. She left through the service entrance and disappeared. Alexander came home at 8. He stopped in the foyer. The lights were different. The smell was different. The entire atmosphere had shifted in a way he couldn't name. It felt less like a museum and more like somewhere he might actually want to be. He did what he always did with new staff. He pulled up the security footage on his tablet, reviewing the day's recordings, checking for theft, laziness, boundary violations. He watched her move through his home like water flowing around stones, never disturbing anything, simply existing in the gaps. Then the camera angle shifted. Afternoon light broke through the clouds and poured to the living room window, falling across her hands as she dusted his bookshelf. And Alexander saw it. On her left hand, twisted copper wire, clumsy and uneven, wrapped around a piece of sea glass. Pale blue, worn smooth by lake waves. The same pale blue as his eyes. His coffee cup slipped from his hand, shattered on the marble floor. That ring, he knew that ring. He had made that ring 23 years ago. Riverside Group Home, Detroit. He was 12. She was 10. They'd shared thin blankets during power outages when the heating failed, split their meager cafeteria meals when one of them was too sick to eat, protected each other from older kids who stole, who bullied, who made survival even harder than it already was. One January night, the coldest of that brutal winter, he'd found copper wire in the dumpster behind the facility. The next day, during their supervised trip to the park, he pocketed a piece of sea glass by the frozen lake. That night, in the darkness after lights out, he twisted them together with fingers that shook from cold and something deeper. He'd crawled to her bunk and pressed it into her palm. "When I get rich," he'd whispered, "I'll marry you. I promise." She'd smiled. A real smile, the kind she never showed anyone else. "I'll wait." 3 weeks later, she was gone. Transferred to another facility in the middle of the night. No goodbye. No forwarding address. Just empty space where she used to be. He'd searched for her. For years he'd searched. Called every group home in Michigan. Filed requests with social services. But she'd vanished into the system like so many lost children do. Eventually, he stopped searching. Buried that boy who made promises in junkyards. Built an empire instead. But 5 years ago, his investigators had found her. Sent him updates, photos, addresses. He'd known exactly where she was, what she did, how she survived. And he'd done nothing. Now she was here, in his home, wearing that ring. The question that hammered at his skull was simple and terrifying. Did she know who he was? Or was she as clueless as she seemed? He rewound the footage, watched her place the sandalwood candles with careful precision. She remembered. She remembered everything. Comment she knows, or she doesn't know below, because what happens next depends on whether this is a reunion or something else entirely. Subscribe so you don't miss how this plays out, because Alexander Hart is about to do something he's never done before. He's going to test her, and what he discovers will change both of their lives forever. Alexander Hart had not become a billionaire by acting rashly. He needed information. He needed to understand her angle. Was she here for money? For blackmail? For revenge because he'd never come looking? So he decided not to confront her. Not yet. Instead, he would test her, and he would watch. Day 3. He left the book on the coffee table before leaving for work. Where the red fern grows. Old, worn, with a spine held together by tape. They'd read it together at Riverside, huddled in the corner of the common room, while other kids fought over the television. Sarah had cried at the ending. Alexander had pretended not to. He watched through the security feed as she found it during her morning routine. She stopped. Her hand hovered over the book, trembling. Then slowly, she picked it up and held it against her chest for 30 seconds. Just held it. Her lips moved, forming words a microphone couldn't catch. Then she placed it carefully on his pillow. Not on the bookshelf where it belonged. On his pillow where he would see it before sleep. She knows. Day 5. He scattered playing cards across the kitchen counter. The same brand they'd use at Riverside. Bicycle playing cards with the red and blue design. They played gin rummy for hours, keeping score on scraps of paper, betting things they didn't have. When he checked the footage, the cards were stacked neatly, and beside them, a note in handwriting he recognized from 23 years ago. Gin rummy champion, 2002. You still owe me a rematch. His hands shook as he read it. Day 8. He left the radio on. The oldies station. The one that played through Riverside's ancient speakers every Sunday morning. Elvis. The Beatles. Songs that smelled like powdered eggs and weak coffee. She found it, paused, then turned the volume up slightly and left it playing. Day 10. He staged an accident. Knocked his coffee across important acquisition documents spread on his desk. Through the camera, he watched her rush to save them, blotting moisture with practiced efficiency. When she finished, when the papers were rescued, she placed something small on top, a peppermint candy, cheap with red and white stripes. Sister Helen's candy jar, the one she kept locked in her office, the way they would sneak in during prayer time, hearts pounding, to steal 2 or 3 mints they would make last for days. If we get caught, Sarah had whispered once, I'll say I did it alone. That's stupid. Why would you do that? Because you're going to be rich someday. You can't have a criminal record. She believed in him, had believed in him when no one else did, when he didn't even believe in himself. Alexander stared at that peppermint candy for an hour. She knew. She'd always known. From the moment she stepped through his door, she'd known exactly who he was. But she was choosing silence. Why? What he didn't know, what he couldn't see through the security cameras, was Sarah's own truth. She knew he was watching, had known from day one. But what could she say? How do you approach someone who promised to marry you and then became a billionaire and never came looking? How do you bridge 23 years of silence with words? She hadn't come here for money or revenge. She'd come to see him, to see if the boy who'd made her a ring from garbage still existed somewhere inside the man who fired people over candles. That was all, just to see. And maybe, in some quiet corner of her heart, to let him see her too, to give him the chance to remember, to choose. If he wanted her, he knew where to find her. But Alexander wasn't the only one watching. In Seattle's elite social circles, word had begun to spread about Alexander Hart's strange new housekeeper. The one no one ever saw. The one who'd somehow survived 3 weeks when no one else had lasted 3 days. And there was someone who didn't like what she was hearing. Someone who would soon make it her business to find out exactly who this ghost really was. If you think he should just talk to her or comment, just talk. If you think he's right to be careful, comment, test, or more. Let's see where you stand. And hit subscribe, because this silent game is about to explode in ways neither of them expect. 3 weeks in, Alexander came home at 9:30 at night, exhausted from negotiations that had stretched 14 hours. A merger that would reshape the entire tech industry hung in the balance, and every muscle in his body ached from the tension of holding his ground against executives who wanted to devour his company whole. He dropped his briefcase in the foyer and walked to the kitchen, expecting nothing. Maybe leftover takeout in the fridge. Maybe nothing at all. Instead, on the counter, he found a bowl of soup, still warm, steam rising in lazy spirals. He stared at it. This wasn't lobster bisque with cream and cognac. It wasn't French onion with Gruyere and truffle oil. It wasn't any of the elaborate dishes his previous housekeepers had tried to impress him with. This was simple chicken broth with too much pepper and not enough salt. Carrots cut too large. Celery still slightly crunchy. Institutional soup, the kind that came from industrial-sized cans and fed 100 kids who had nowhere else to go. Group home soup. He sat down at the counter, picked up the spoon with a hand that trembled slightly, and he ate. Every spoonful was 2002. Every swallow was a freezing Detroit winter, where this exact soup meant survival. Tuesday nights. Always Tuesday nights. Sister Helen ladling it into plastic bowls while kids lined up with trays, their breath visible in the cold cafeteria because the heating barely worked. Sarah always gave him half her crackers. He always pretended he wasn't hungry, so she could have more. When he finished, he sat there for an hour. Just sat, staring at the empty bowl, feeling something crack open in his chest. Something he'd sealed shut 23 years ago when he woke up and she was gone. He pulled out his phone. His fingers moved before his brain could stop them. I know it's you, Sarah. His thumb hovered over send. One tap. That's all it would take. One tap to end this strange, silent dance they'd been performing for 3 weeks. He stared at the message, at her name on his screen. Then he deleted it. Not yet. Not like this. Not through a text message after 23 years of silence. He put his phone down and picked up the bowl, carrying it to the sink. He washed it carefully, dried it, put it away exactly where she'd found it. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow, he would figure out what to say. How to bridge the impossible distance between who they'd been and who they'd become. What he didn't know was that he had only 3 days left. 3 days before everything would explode in the worst possible way. 3 days before silence would no longer be an option. Miles away, in a small apartment above a laundromat in Portland, Sarah Mitchell sat at her tiny kitchen table eating the same soup from the same recipe. She'd made enough for two, the way Sister Helen always taught them. Never cook just for yourself. Always make enough to share. She looked at the copper ring on her finger, traced the twisted wire with her thumb, and she wondered if he'd tasted the memory, if he'd understood what she was trying to say without words, that she remembered, that she'd never forgotten, that some promises don't need to be spoken aloud to be kept. Margaret Chen had been Alexander's publicist for 6 years, and she'd never been this desperate. She sat across from him in his office, tablet in hand, her expression somewhere between professional concern and barely concealed panic. "The candle incident has 42 million views on TikTok," she said flatly. "You're a meme." Candle tyrant. Investors are getting nervous about the instability narrative. Alexander didn't look up from his laptop. "I don't care about narratives. You should care about stock prices. They're down 8%. That got his attention. Margaret sees a moment. Host a charity gala. Here at the mansion. Show Seattle's elite that you're human, generous, capable of basic warmth. Classical music. Champagne. Write a big check to something photogenic. Let me rehabilitate your image before the acquisition falls apart." Alexander considered this. A house full of people. Strangers invading his space. Everything he hated. But if the merger collapsed because of his reputation, he'd lose more than money. He'd lose leverage, control, the thing he'd spent 23 years building. "Fine," he said. "One condition. My housekeeper coordinates the temporary staff." Margaret blinked. "Your housekeeper?" "Yes." Why would you? That's the condition. Margaret didn't understand, but she agreed anyway. Why would she care who coordinated staff? It was a small concession for a major PR win. What neither of them knew was that this decision would change everything, because the gala would have 200 guests, champagne and crystal flutes, a string quartet playing Vivaldi, and one very cruel woman named Victoria Ashford, who would see a copper ring on a maid's finger and decide to destroy it. The night of the gala, the mansion blazed with light, crystal chandeliers, white roses cascading from every surface, a string quartet playing Vivaldi near the fireplace, waiters in black ties circulating with champagne that cost more per bottle than most people's monthly rent. Alexander stood at the center of it all, shaking hands with senators and CEOs, accepting compliments on his home and his generosity, playing the role Margaret had scripted for him. Charming, engaged, human, but his eyes kept drifting, searching to the crowd of designer gowns and expensive suits for a glimpse of gray uniform, of dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. He found her near the kitchen entrance, quietly directing a waiter who nearly dropped a tray of hors d'oeuvres. She moved with the same efficiency she always had, solving problems before anyone else noticed them, disappearing back into the shadows before anyone could thank her. Victoria Ashford was holding court near the fireplace. Old money, old grudges against tech billionaires like Alexander, who'd earned their fortunes instead of inheriting them. She wore a crimson gown that cost as much as a car and diamonds that cost as much as a house. She was also on her fourth glass of champagne. She gestures too wildly, telling some story about her villa in Tuscany. The wine glass tilted. Red wine arced through the air like blood. Sarah appeared from nowhere. She moved faster than anyone should have been able to move, positioning herself between Victoria and a group of guests. The wine splashed across her gray uniform, staining it instantly, permanently. Victoria's face went red, embarrassment that quickly transformed into rage. "You clumsy fool." Her voice cut through the music. "Look what you've done." Sarah stood perfectly still. "Mrs. Ashford, I apologize." "Apologize? You ruined my evening." Victoria's voice was rising, drawing attention from nearby guests. "Do you have any idea what this gown costs? More than you'll earn in your entire pathetic little life, I imagine." Sarah didn't flinch. She absorbed Victoria's rage like stone absorbing rain, her face calm, professional, empty of everything except patience. Then Victoria's eyes fell to Sarah's hand, to the ring. Her expression shifted from anger to contempt. "What is that? Is that trash? Are you wearing garbage as jewelry?" She grabbed Sarah's wrist, yanking her hand up for inspection, for everyone to see. "My God, it is trash. Copper wire and a piece of broken glass." Victoria's laugh was sharp, cruel. I knew servants were desperate, but the ring slipped. It happened in slow motion. Victoria's grip, too tight and too careless. The twist of Sarah's wrist. The copper ring, loose from years of wear, sliding free. It fell. The sound when it hit the marble floor was small, barely audible over Vivaldi and champagne conversations. A tiny clink of metal on stone. But Alexander heard it from across the ballroom. It cut through everything, through music and laughter, and the careful performance he'd been giving all night. His head snapped up. His eyes found Sarah instantly, found her standing there with her wrist still caught in Victoria's grip, her face finally showing emotion, not anger, not embarrassment. Loss. He was moving before conscious thought, before Margaret could intercept him, before the rational part of his brain could remind him that 200 people were watching, that cameras were flashing, that this would be tomorrow's headline. He didn't care. He crossed the ballroom in a straight line, ignoring the senator who tried to catch his attention, stepping around waiters who scrambled out of his way. People were staring. Phones were rising. Margaret's face, somewhere in his peripheral vision, looked like she might faint. None of it mattered. Victoria was still holding Sarah's wrist, still lecturing about proper behavior and knowing one's place, still completely unaware that the most powerful man in the room was bearing down on her with an expression that made grown men step back. If you can't stand bullies like Victoria, comment no more cruelty. This is where taking a stand matters. Subscribe, because what happens next will restore your faith in justice and prove that some things are worth more than all the money in the world. Alexander Hart dropped to his knees. The marble floor was cold through his custom suit pants. Tomorrow there would be bruises. He didn't care. The ring had rolled against the base of a flower arrangement. He picked it up with hands that had signed billion-dollar contracts, hands that had shaken with presidents and kings. Those hands were trembling now. He pulled out his monogrammed silk handkerchief, $300 of custom Italian linen, and carefully, reverently, wiped the dust from the twisted copper wire. The ballroom had gone silent. Even the string quartet had stopped playing. 200 people held their breath. Alexander rose to his feet and turned to face Victoria Ashford. Mrs. Ashford. His voice was quiet. He never raised his voice. Victoria opened her mouth, but he continued before she could speak. You may purchase this entire mansion if you wish. You may purchase everything in it. You may purchase the land it stands on and the ocean it overlooks. He turned to Sarah, took her hand gently, so gently as if she were something precious that might break. But you do not have enough money in all your accounts, in all your family's accounts, to purchase the right to touch this ring. He slid the copper ring back onto her finger, his thumb lingering on her hand for just a moment. Its value exceeds the combined worth of every company your husband has ever owned, every stock, every asset, every dollar you will ever see. He looked directly into Victoria's eyes. Because 23 years ago, when I had nothing, no money, no family, no future, a 10-year-old girl believed in me. She believed in me when no one else did, when I didn't even believe in myself. And I made her this ring from garbage I found in a dumpster and promised I'd marry her when I escaped poverty. The crowd gasped. Cameras flashed. Someone dropped a champagne glass. She kept the ring. She kept the promise. She wore it every single day for 23 years. And you just called it garbage. He turned his back on Victoria, a deliberate dismissal that was more cutting than any insult. Mrs. Ashford's car is waiting. Security moved forward immediately. Victoria's face had gone from red to white, her mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. Then Alexander faced Sarah fully. Her eyes were brimming with tears. Her lips trembled. Her hand, the one he still held, shook slightly in his grip. Sarah, her name, spoken aloud for the first time since childhood, since Riverside, since cold Detroit winters, and shared soup and promises made in the dark. Alex, she whispered, just his name, but the way she said it carried 23 years of waiting. Not here, he said quietly, for her ears only. Not now, but soon. I promise. He released her hand and walked away. Behind him, the gala erupted into chaos. Guests swarming. Margaret looking like she might have a heart attack. Phones recording everything. Headlines being written in real time. But Alexander heard none of it. All he heard was his name in her voice. All he felt was the memory of her hand in his. If you're crying right now, you're not alone. Comment justice if you love seeing Victoria put in her place, and subscribe because the story isn't over. It's about to get even more emotional, because Sarah couldn't stay. Not after this. And what Alexander found the next morning would break him in ways money could never fix. Sarah left before dawn. Alexander found the letter on the kitchen counter, in the exact spot where she always placed his cucumber water. His hand shook as he unfolded it. Mr. Hart, I apologize for any disruption my presence has caused. After last night's events, it's clear my employment here has become inappropriate. The ring you recognize belonged to a boy I knew when we were children. I did not come here to collect on old promises or to complicate your life. I came because I needed to see if that boy still existed inside the man. I have my answer. I wish you every happiness. Alex, you deserve more than you know. Sarah, Alexander read it 3 times, each time hoping the words would change, that she'd say she was staying, that she'd give him a chance to explain. On the 3rd reading, he crumpled it into a ball and threw it at the wall. Then he said words that would have gotten his mouth washed with soap at Riverside Group Home. The house was silent around him. Not the peaceful silence of the past 3 weeks. This was the old silence. The empty silence. The silence of a fortress with no one inside worth protecting. He stood there for 10 minutes, staring at the crumpled letter on the floor. He had her address. He'd always had her address. For 5 years, he'd known exactly where she lived, what she did, how she survived. The question wasn't whether he could find her. The question was whether he finally had the courage to stop being a coward. Alexander found her in a neighborhood he remembered too well. Row houses with peeling paint, the smell of exhaust and fried food, cracked sidewalks that had never been repaired. He parked his old Ford F-150 and waited. Not the Tesla, not the Mercedes. The truck he bought 23 years ago with his first paycheck. Kept in his garage all these years because selling felt like erasing proof that he'd started from nothing. 3 hours passed. Then she appeared, walking home from a shift somewhere. Fast food uniform, grease stains on her sleeve, a plastic bag that probably contained dinner for one. She stopped when she saw him leaning against the truck. 20 feet of cracked sidewalk between them. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "The media will have a field day." "I don't care about the media. Your reputation was built on being untouchable, cold, ruthless. I spent 23 years building those walls so no one could get close enough to see the truth. That underneath all the success and all the money, I was still just a terrified kid from Riverside who lost the only person who ever mattered." He pushed off from the truck and took a step toward her. "I found you 5 years ago, Sarah. Had investigators send me updates, photos, addresses. I knew exactly where you were, what jobs you worked, how you survived." Her eyes widened. "You knew." "I knew, and I did nothing. Because I was a coward. Because I convinced myself that the boy you believed in didn't exist anymore. That I'd killed him, buried him under ambition and success, and all the armor I needed to survive in a world that eats people like us alive. Another step closer. But then you showed up in my house, taking care of me the same way you did when we were children, leaving signs that you remembered, that you still saw him. And I realized that boy isn't dead. He's been waiting for you to come back." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, not the expensive kind from jewelry stores. This one was worn, brown, old, like something kept for a very long time. He opened it. Inside was a spool of bright copper wire and a small pair of wire cutters. "I'm not giving you a diamond," he said. "You never wanted a goose egg diamond. You wanted this." Sarah stared at the box, her hand rising to cover her mouth. "Teach me," Alexander said. "Teach me how to make another ring. Let me earn you this time. Let me prove I can be the boy you believed in, not just the man I became." "Here." Her voice cracked. "On this street, I want to spend the rest of my life making things with you. Rings, a home, a future, whatever you'll let me be part of." He took her hand, the one with the old copper ring still wrapped around her finger. "I don't want you to wear my diamonds, Sarah. I want to wear your copper. I want to belong to you, not the other way around." She looked at him for a long moment, at the velvet box, at their joined hands, at the man who finally found the courage to stop running from who he really was. Then she smiled, the same smile from 23 years ago, real and warm and full of hope. "Give me the wire cutters," she said. 1 year later, the mansion had changed. Plants filled the windowsills. Photographs from Riverside Group Home hung on the walls. A framed copy of Where the Red Fern Grows, spine held together with tape, sat on the mantel. Alexander was on a video call with his board of directors. Custom suit, expensive watch, and on his left hand, slightly crooked and obviously handmade, a ring of twisted copper wire with a piece of sea glass at its center. The door opened behind him. "Meeting's running long," Sarah said. "Dinner's ready. Give me 5 minutes." "Now, Alex. The soup's getting cold." He looked at his board members. They looked back, knowing better than to argue. Meeting adjourned. He closed the laptop. Sarah laughed and settled into his lap. Their rings clinked together. Copper on copper. The sound of 2 promises kept. Outside, The Pacific Ocean stretched toward the horizon, endless and blue. In the kitchen, soup was getting cold. The same soup from Riverside. Too much pepper. Not enough salt. Institutional and humble and perfect. It tasted like childhood. It tasted like survival. It tasted like home. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button and subscribe. Comment copper over diamonds. If you believe the most valuable things in life can't be bought. New stories of kindness, love, and second chances drop every week. Thank you for being part of this journey. See you in the next one.